The turkey wasn't even carved yet when my daughter's fiancé slid a leather folder onto the table, folded his hands like a man about to do us all a favor, and said he needed $750,000 by Monday, or, in his words, "We lose the whole thing." He said we. Like I was already in. He smiled at me the way salesmen smile, the warmth that never quite reaches the eyes. And I was halfway to some polite Thanksgiving nonsense about how we'd talk it over, when I felt my daughter's knee press hard against mine under the table, and a folded paper napkin pushed into my palm. I didn't look down. I just closed my fingers around it, and while he kept talking about bridge financing and once-in-a-lifetime windows, I ran my thumb across that napkin and felt the pen strokes press so hard they'd nearly torn through. 3 words: Dad, he's lying. And then, smaller, dug in deeper, get me out. I set down my fork, took a slow sip of water, and said one sentence that wiped the smile clean off his face. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read everyone. My name is Calvin Renfro. I'm 67 years old, and for 31 years I was a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation out of the Pittsburgh field office. People hear IRS and picture some gray little man auditing your shoebox of receipts. That's not what I did. I carried a badge and a gun, and I put white-collar predators in federal prison, money launderers, Ponzi operators, the kind of charming, well-dressed men who can look a retired widow in the eye and talk her out of her late husband's pension without ever once raising their voice. I spent 3 decades learning the shape of that particular animal. I thought I'd seen every version of it. Turns out, the most dangerous one doesn't come at you across a deposition table. It shows up at your house for Thanksgiving, brings a nice bottle of wine, and calls you sir. I'd been retired 4 years by that November. I lost my wife, Joan, to ovarian cancer 6 years back, and the house outside Pittsburgh got real quiet after that. Too quiet. I filled it the way men of my generation tend to. I built a workshop in the garage, and I started restoring old wood and canvas canoes, the kind nobody makes anymore. There's something about stripping a ruined hull down to the ribs and bringing it back that kept me sane those first years. My daughter Hannah worried I was hiding out in that garage. Maybe I was. Hannah is 34. She's an ER nurse at Allegheny General, and she is, or was, the most level-headed person I know. Careful with men. Careful with money. She watched her old man chase con artists her whole childhood, so she had a built-in radar most people don't. When she called me last spring to say she'd met someone, a man named Devin, I was just plain happy. Relieved, even. She'd been alone a long time, working those brutal 12-hour shifts, and I figured she'd earned a little happiness. So when she finally brought him around in the summer, I didn't do the thing I should have done. I didn't ask the questions a man with my resume is supposed to ask. I just shook his hand and told myself to be glad. He was easy to be glad about at first. Good-looking in a polished way, mid-40s, firm handshake, looked you dead in the eye when he talked. He said he was a real estate developer, assisted living facilities, senior communities. The demographics are a tidal wave, Calvin. The boomers are aging into it right now. He had answers for everything. Drove a leased Range Rover, wore a watch that cost more than my first house. And he was attentive to my daughter in a way that, I'm ashamed to say, disarmed me. Pulled her chair out, refilled her wine. Touched the small of her back. I watched her glow under it, and I thought, good. Finally somebody's taking care of her. But you don't spend 31 years reading people and turn it off, just because you want to. Even then, in the back of my mind, little things filed themselves away. The way every story he told eventually curved back around to money. Who had it? Who didn't? What something cost? The way he asked me, our second time meeting, what I'd done before I retired, and how his face did a quick recalculation when I told him. The way Hannah, my careful, sharp daughter, had started looking thinner over those months. Tired in a way that wasn't her usual shift work tired. She'd check her phone with a kind of flinch when he wasn't watching. Then, put on a smile. I noticed all of it. I just told myself a story about pre-wedding stress, because they'd gotten engaged 6 weeks before that Thanksgiving, and I wanted, God help me, for it to be fine. That Thanksgiving I'd hosted at my place. My daughter, her fiancé, and a fourth chair I hadn't expected. His business partner, a heavyset, smooth-talking man named Royce Lang, who he introduced as the money man on his projects. I remember thinking it was odd to bring a business associate to a family holiday. I said another place. I carved no turkey because we never got that far. The fiancé waited until we were all seated, glasses poured, that warm holiday hush settling over the table, and then he reached down beside his chair and brought up the leather folder. He opened it like he was unveiling something. Glossy renderings of a building. Spreadsheets. He started talking, and the man could talk. The deal of a lifetime. A parcel of land near a hospital where they were going to break ground on a memory care facility. Fully entitled, financing committed, except for one little gap. A bridge loan had fallen through at the last second. The lender got cold feet. He needed $750,000 to close by Monday, and if he didn't have it, the seller walked and they lost the earnest money, the entitlements, everything Hannah and I have been building toward. That was when he said we lose the whole thing, and looked right at me, and the partner nodded along on cue, and my daughter sat very still with her hands in her lap. And the reason you're bringing this to me, I said, at Thanksgiving dinner, because you're family now, Calvin. He spread his hands, all warmth, or you will be, and family takes care of each other. Hannah's already all in. I'd hate for the people who love her to be on the outside of the best thing that ever happened to her. There it was. Crude, but it works on most people. Support this, or you don't support your daughter. The partner picked it up smooth as a relay handoff. We're not asking for a handout, sir. We're offering an opportunity. We expect to triple it inside 18 months. Triple it. 18 months. With no signed term sheet on the table, no lender name, no audited anything. Just a number and a deadline, and two men watching my face to see how I'd break. That's the precise moment I felt the napkin in my hand. My daughter's knee against mine. Dad. He's lying. Get me out, and 40 years of training told me one thing above all. The instant you show your hand is the instant you lose it. So I didn't change my face. I let the dread settle into me. The realization that the tiredness, the flinching at her phone, the friends of hers I hadn't seen in months, all of it had a name now, and the name was sitting across my own dinner table, asking me for $750,000. I took a sip of water. I let the silence stretch the way I used to let it stretch in an interview room, until the other side starts filling it. And then I said the sentence. Son, I spent 31 years reading the books people like you keep. And I have never once seen a real deal that needed cash by Monday and couldn't survive a single phone call to a bank. You'd have thought I'd thrown the water in his face. The smile didn't drop so much as freeze, hold, and curdle. The partner's eyes went flat. And my daughter exhaled, just slightly, like she'd been holding her breath since June. I think you're misunderstanding the timeline. The fiancé started, recovering fast, the way they always do. These windows, then let's understand it together. I kept my voice mild, friendly even. Thanksgiving friendly. You've got a parcel, you've got entitlements, you've got committed financing minus a bridge. Wonderful. So you've got a term sheet from the original lender. You've got the purchase agreement. You've got the LLC's operating agreement and its bank statements, and you've got the seller's signed contract with the closing date in writing. Bring all of it to me Monday morning. If it's real, I'll write you a check before lunch. I've got the money. That's not the question. Calvin, the partner started. The question, I said, is whether any of it exists. The table had gone arctic. The partner tried. We don't appreciate being treated like criminals, and I said, pleasantly, I haven't accused anyone of anything. I've asked to see paperwork. An honest man brings paperwork. Only a liar gets insulted by the request. The fiancé reached over and put his hand on my daughter's. She didn't move. Babe, he said, tell your dad this is real. And she looked at her plate and she didn't say anything, and that silence was the loudest thing in the room. He changed tactics then. They always cycle through them. It's almost a checklist. The charm had failed, so he went wounded. Maybe this was a mistake, he said. Maybe he'd overestimated how much this family actually cared. Maybe he and Hannah should just handle it themselves, quietly, without the third degree. And I watched my daughter's face do something I recognized from old cases. That flicker of guilt, the trained reflex to apologize, to smooth it over, to make him stop being hurt. Whatever he'd done to her over those months, he'd built that reflex in her like a callus. I stood up. I picked up the leather folder, closed it, and slid it back across the table to him. You've got till Monday at 9, I said. Same offer. Real documents. Real money. Now. I looked at my daughter. Honey, come help me in the kitchen a minute. The fiancé started to get up. Hannah doesn't have to. Yes, I said. and I let just a little of the old steel into it, the voice I used to use when a defense attorney got cute. She does. Because she's my daughter, and I'd like to speak with her in her father's house on a holiday. You and your partner are welcome to wait. Or not. She followed me into the kitchen. The second the door swung shut behind us, she came apart, quiet and shaking, so the two in the dining room wouldn't hear. And what she told me over the next 2 hours after they'd left, sitting at my kitchen table with the cold turkey still in the oven, made the blood pound in my ears. It started, she said, the way it always starts. He was attentive, intelligent, interested, asked about her work, actually listened. By the second date, he was asking what part of town she lived in. Did she own or rent? Where'd she grown up? What'd her dad do? She'd thought he was getting to know her. I knew better. Those aren't questions. Those are an appraisal. He told her, early, that his last relationship ended because the woman was financially reckless, and Hannah found herself proud that her credit was good and her savings were solid. Proud of being exactly the mark he was measuring her for. Then came the loans. A cash flow hiccup on a project, $20,000 to cover a vendor, paid back in 2 weeks. He swore, and he did pay back a little, just enough to build trust. Then $15,000 to save a deal. Then earnest money she fronted that was supposed to be reimbursed at closing. Then he'd talked her into a $5,000 investment in a friend's business she never saw. And the isolation. God, the isolation. Her best friend from nursing school didn't respect the relationship. Her brother, who lives in Columbus, was negative about everything. Her gym friends were a bad influence on her schedule. One by one, without ever quite seeming to, he'd trimmed away every single person who might have looked at this man and said the obvious thing out loud. By that Thanksgiving, the only people she talked to regularly were him and his partner. How much? I asked her, as gently as I could. Total. Be honest with me. She couldn't even look at me. Around $60,000, she said, drained her savings, taken a loan against her 401A. He'd been pushing her, that very week, to open a home equity line on the little condo she'd bought with her own money. We can leverage it for the project, babe. It's basically free money. When she'd hesitated, the week before, he'd thrown a wine glass against her kitchen wall. Then cried, then apologized, then told her he was just so stressed about the deal and her family not stepping up. I'd seen that exact pattern a dozen times. Escalation. They test how much weight the bridge will hold before they drive the truck across. The wedding money play, the $750,000, wasn't a separate thing. It was the big swing, the one they go for, once they've isolated the target and softened the family. And the partner wasn't a partner. He was the closer, the second voice. Every time she'd wavered, Royce had been there to validate, to reinforce, to make her doubt herself. One person can't run a con this clean. It takes a team. His name's not even Devin Kessler, I told her, and watched her go pale. I'd bet my pension on it. Tomorrow I'm going to find out who he actually is. I'll tell you the truth. Somewhere in those 4 years of canoe sanding and silence, I'd thought the old fire was out. It wasn't. It came roaring back that night. Somebody had walked into my family and gone hunting, and they'd picked the wrong house. Monday morning came and went, of course, with no documents. The fiancé sent a long, aggrieved text about how disappointed he was, how he'd hoped for support, how he and Hannah might just elope and cut us out. That 72-hour deadline I'd given him at the table, it wasn't arbitrary. I gave him 3 days for one reason. It was enough time for them to either produce real paperwork, which they couldn't, or to try to fake it and make a mistake. And while they scrambled, I went to work. I'd kept my contacts. There's a fellowship among people who chase fraud for a living. And you don't lose it just because you turned in your badge. I called a man I'd trained myself, a special agent named Halloran, still working out of the Pittsburgh field office. And I called an assistant U.S. attorney named Maddox in the Western District of Pennsylvania, who'd tried 3 cases with me back in the day. I told them I had a live one, and that it was personal, and that I'd already done half their legwork for free. The LLC the investment wire was supposed to go to was registered in Delaware, 3 months old, with a registered agent and no operating history. The signatory traced to a man whose real name, it turned out, was not Devin Kessler. He had 3 prior aliases and a sealed juvenile record we couldn't touch, but also 2 adult fraud cases, one in Arizona, one in North Carolina, that he'd skated on through plea deals and 1 mistrial. The partner had a sheet of his own, a securities fraud bar, and a suspended contractor's license in 2 states. They'd left a trail like a couple of dragging anchors. They were good at the soft skills, the manipulation, the charm. They were sloppy at the part where you have to actually hide the money. And there were others. This is the part that turned my stomach. When Halloran's people started pulling the threads, the same two men, under rotating names, surfaced across at least 7 victims in 3 states over the prior 4 years. A widow in Erie who'd handed over her husband's life insurance payout for a land deal. A retired schoolteacher in Youngstown. A divorced man in Columbus who'd lost his settlement money. Same playbook every time. The charm, the dream, the isolation, the escalating loans, the big final ask. My daughter wasn't the first. She was just the most recent name on a long, ugly list. To these two men, the people they ruined weren't people. They were marks. The fraud wasn't even cruelty exactly. It was just business. Well, business has consequences. I'd spent my whole career making sure of that. We built the case fast because they'd handed it to us. But Maddox and Halloran wanted something cleaner than a he said, she said. They wanted the men on tape, asking for the money, knowing the deal was false. So we set the trap, and I'll admit, there was a piece of me that enjoyed it more than a man my age should. We let it cool for a week. Then I had Hannah reach out to him. Tearful, contrite. She'd talked to her father, she said. Gotten through to the old man, he'd come around. He was scared, but he understood now, and he was prepared to fund the bridge. But he wanted to do it in person properly, see the project, meet at their offices, sign like gentlemen. The fiancé took the bait so fast it almost wasn't sporting. Of course he had an office. They rented a suite that week in a half-empty professional building near the airport. I drove past it twice. And when I walked in that morning, with my daughter beside me, the headquarters of a $40 million development firm turned out to be one room with a folding table, 3 folding chairs they'd bought somewhere for $15 apiece, and a stack of those same glossy renderings propped against a wall. No staff, no phones, no project, an empty room and 2 men in good suits. It told me everything, and it told the recording equipment everything too. I sat down in one of those $15 chairs, set my checkbook on the folding table, and let them run their pitch one more time for the microphones. The fiancé was magnificent, honestly. He hit every note, the dream, the timeline, the family. You won't regret this, Calvin. I know we got off on the wrong foot. The partner produced a wire instruction sheet pointing at that shell, LLC. I uncapped my pen. I let the moment swell. And then I set the pen down, and I looked the man who'd been planning to marry my daughter dead in the eye, and I gave him the second sentence, the one I'd been saving since Thanksgiving. Before I sign anything, I said, I'd like you to tell me which name you'd like on the check, because I've got 3 to choose from. I have prosecuted men for 20 years, and I have never seen a human face drain that fast. The partner was already standing, already reaching for the door, when it opened from the outside. And Halloran came through it with 2 more agents and a set of handcuffs, and behind them, an Allegheny County detective, and the small empty office filled up with the very thing those 2 men had spent their whole lives running from. Accountability, walking in wearing windbreakers with letters on the back. The fiancé actually looked at me in that last second with something like betrayal, as if I were the one who'd broken faith, as if I'd cheated. They always do. Professional con men spend their lives controlling the story, and the one thing they cannot survive is the moment somebody takes the pen out of their hand and writes the ending themselves. He was indicted in the Western District of Pennsylvania on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. So was the partner. The 7 other victims came forward once word got out, and the U.S. attorney rolled them all into one case. And the recordings from that folding chair office did exactly what I'd hoped. There was no trial in the end. Faced with the tapes, the financials, the aliases, and 4 years of victims, both men took pleas. The one who'd called himself Devon got 11 years in federal prison. The partner got 9. There's no parole in the federal system worth mentioning, so they'll both be old men before they're free, and there's a restitution order following them the rest of their lives. My daughter got a good piece of her money back through that order. Not all of it. Restitution rarely is all of it, but a real piece. A cashier's check came in the mail months later with the Department of Justice in the return address, and she cried when she opened it, and it wasn't about the amount. What I remember most isn't the arrest. It's the night after, when it was just the 2 of us again at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd come apart on Thanksgiving. She asked me how I'd known, that very first night, with nothing but a napkin and a number. And I told her the truth, that I hadn't known, not for certain, not yet, but that she had. Some deep part of her had recognized the lie months before her hand ever wrote those 3 words under my dinner table. She just needed somebody to look her in the eye and tell her she wasn't crazy, that the thing her gut had been screaming was real. That's the cruelest trick these people run. They don't just steal your money. They steal your faith in your own judgment, so that by the time you're sure, you're too ashamed to say it out loud. I kept thinking I was the problem, she said. He had me convinced that being suspicious meant I was a bad person. Honey, I said, the day someone makes you feel guilty for being smart, that's the day you should run. I reached over and held her hand, the way that man used to, except this time it meant what it was supposed to mean. A man who loves you wants to know what you think. A man who's working you only ever wants to know what you've got. You remember the difference, and nobody will ever do this to you again. She's all right now, my daughter. Better than all right. She went back to the friends he'd peeled away from her, and most of them came back without a word of judgment, because that's what real friends do. She's still an ER nurse, still saving people on the worst night of their lives, and last I checked she was dating a quiet, unremarkable, wonderful man who fixes HVAC systems for a living, and once spent an entire dinner asking her, genuinely, about a patient she couldn't stop worrying about. He has never once asked her what her father did before he retired. I like him fine. As for me, I went back out to the garage. There's a 1948 cedar strip canoe out there. I've been bringing back to life, 80 years old. Half the ribs rotted through when I got it, and I've been rebuilding it one strip at a time. It'll take me through the winter. People ask why a man would put 1,000 hours into something he could buy new for a fraction of the cost, and I've never had a good answer until lately. Now I think it's this. There's a kind of justice in taking something somebody tried to throw away, something that got ruined by neglect and bad weather, and people who didn't see what it was worth, and putting in the patient work to make it sound again. You can't unrot the old wood, but you can replace what's broken, and you can seal it tight, and you can put it back in the water where it belongs, and it will carry weight again. I retired from the government 4 years ago. I turned in the badge and the gun, and I told myself the hunting was done. But it turns out you can retire from the job, and the job never quite retires from you. There's a particular kind of man out there who looks at a comfortable, older father, a tired daughter, a quiet family with a little money and a lot of grief, and he sees nothing but an opportunity wearing a Thanksgiving sweater. And every once in a while, one of them is going to sit down at the wrong table, smile the wrong smile, and ask the wrong man for $750,000 by Monday. When that happens, I hope he remembers there might be somebody at that table who spent 31 years learning exactly what he is, and who has all the time in the world, and an old canoe to finish, and absolutely nothing left to lose. If this story meant something to you, do me a favor, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt that quiet alarm bell go off about someone, the one you talked yourself out of? Click the next story on your screen, and I'll see you there.